I always considered myself a patient man. Not saintly, not noble, just a man who kept showing up. I wasn't born with a halo over my head, and I didn't marry my wife expecting to be anyone's savior. I was just a middle-aged guy who had spent most of his life working, saving, and keeping things in order. I ran a property management company that I built from the ground up. By the time I met Julia, my now wife, I already owned 3 rental homes, 2 condos, and a brownstone in Brooklyn. She was beautiful, confident, twice divorced, and had a teenage daughter who carried a chip on her shoulder bigger than any of the buildings I managed. Her name was Liana, and from the day I met her, I could feel she was measuring me, deciding whether I was just another temporary presence or someone she'd have to tolerate long term. I didn't push her. I didn't try to be dad. I showed up, paid bills, went to her soccer games, helped with college applications when she asked. I even paid for her to get Invisalign her senior year after she cried in the car about being called brace face one too many times. But none of it mattered. I was always just Julia's husband. It was a Thursday evening when I asked. The house was quiet. Julia was reading on the couch, and I was sorting through a stack of mail at the kitchen island. I asked it casually. Hey, when is Liana's graduation? I want to make sure I clear my schedule. I wasn't expecting a thank you or even acknowledgement, just basic logistics. But she didn't even look up from her book. She just said it like she was reciting a line she'd rehearsed. It was last Saturday. At first, I thought I misheard. I looked up from the envelope I was tearing open, blinked. Wait, what? She finally looked at me and repeated it, this time slower, with just the slightest hint of guilt in her eyes. It already happened. Don't be worried. Only real family members were invited. That sentence, that exact sentence, it didn't just land, it carved something out of me. I remember the sound of the clock ticking above the stove. I remember the way the light hit the side of her face like a spotlight on betrayal. But more than anything, I remember how I smiled. Just a small, polite smile like the kind you give to a stranger who bumps into you at the grocery store. I nodded, set the mail down, and walked out the back door. It's strange the things your mind does when it's hurt. Mine didn't rage, didn't scream. I didn't even feel heartbroken in the moment. What I felt was clarity. Like someone had finally turned the lights on in a room I'd been sitting in for years. I walked the block twice. The air was heavy with that early summer heat, and I could still smell the neighbors grilling. My hands were shaking, but I didn't feel anything. Not yet. I just kept hearing her say it, real family. As if I hadn't been the one to sign the Parent Plus loan when her father ghosted. As if I hadn't been the one to drive 4 hours to pick her up from college after she and her roommate had a screaming match and she didn't want to take the bus. Real family. What the hell does that even mean? Is it blood? Genetics? Because if it is, then she can go ask the man who shares her DNA why he never even sent her a birthday card. I didn't sleep that night. Julia came into the bedroom like nothing had happened. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just laid next to me and scrolled through her phone until she fell asleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the last 12 years like a movie I didn't even remember agreeing to star in. I remembered every dinner I paid for, every vacation I funded, every time I stepped in as the voice of reason when she and her daughter were at war. I remembered watching Liana get her acceptance letter to Columbia, the way she screamed and jumped into my arms. Even though later she'd swear she didn't remember it. I remembered the time she was drunk and crying on our porch after her first breakup, and how I sat with her until she fell asleep. But most of all, I remembered that I was never invited to graduation, that they had a family celebration without me. The next morning, I was drinking coffee on the deck when I heard the front door open. Liana. She was dressed like she just walked off a runway. Big sunglasses, leather purse, tight jeans that looked too expensive for someone making an entry-level salary. Hey, she called out like nothing was wrong, like we hadn't just crossed the final boundary the night before. Can I talk to you? I said nothing, just sipped my coffee and waited. She sat down across from me, pulled out her phone, and got straight to the point. So, I'm moving in with Evan, but we need a place to crash while the lease starts. Can you give me the keys to the New York house? I didn't look up at her right away. I just let the silence stretch until it started to feel like gravity. Then I looked her straight in the eyes and said, that house is for real family members. The silence that followed was nuclear. Her mouth dropped open slightly, like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to throw those words back at her. "Are you serious?" she said, voice rising. "You're really going to be petty about this?" I didn't flinch. "Petty is keeping your stepfather out of your graduation after he paid for half your life," I said. This is boundaries." Her face twisted into something bitter, lips curled, eyes narrow, like I was the villain in her origin story. "You're the worst person I've ever known," she snapped. "You're not even human. You're a spiteful old man." And then she stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard it rattled the windows. And that was just the beginning. She didn't text me. Not that day. Not the next. And that suited me just fine. I needed the silence. I needed the absence of her voice, her attitude, her entitlement. Because I wasn't angry. I was surgical. You have to understand something about people like me. When we finally decide to stop caring, we don't throw tantrums. We just remove the scaffolding you've been standing on and walk away while you fall. And that morning, when she tried to collect keys like they were hand-me-downs, I saw her clearly for the first time in years. Not as a girl who had struggled, not as someone I'd grown to care for, just as a user, someone who had drained me emotionally, financially, and psychologically, all while treating me like a footnote. And worse, my wife had enabled it. Julia didn't just ignore it, she co-signed it. So no, I didn't lose sleep over her tears. I didn't second-guess my words. What I felt, more than anything, was relief. I had finally said something real, and it felt like taking off shoes 2 sizes too small. 2 days after the slammed door, Julia confronted me in the kitchen. I was sautéing garlic for a pasta dish, something I always did on Sundays, and she came in wearing her passive-aggressive armor, arms crossed, voice too calm, like she was trying to defuse a bomb she didn't realize she'd built. "Liana's devastated," she said. "You really didn't need to say that to her." I stirred the pan once, slowly, and replied without turning around. "You mean the part about real family? The same phrase you used on me." She exhaled sharply, like she had expected me to forget, like I was supposed to treat her betrayal like a casual comment. I was upset. It was a poor choice of words. I finally faced her. "No, it was an honest one. You said what you meant. So did I." Her face crumpled into that look she wore when she realized I wasn't playing the role she cast me in. "You're punishing her." "No," I said coolly. "I'm removing myself from the equation. There's a difference." She walked out after that. No plate of pasta, no olive branch, just the sound of her heels on the hardwood and the bedroom door clicking shut. And I stood there, watching the garlic turn golden in the pan, realizing how long I'd been cooking for people who never thanked me. Liana used to eat with her phone in hand, never making eye contact. Julia used to compliment my cooking only when guests were over, never when it was just the 3 of us. I fed them, housed them, protected them. But when it came time to honor me, I wasn't even worthy of an invite. And somehow I was supposed to believe that I was the one overreacting. The real turning point came that Friday. I got a call from a friend of mine, Mike, who managed the HR department at the design firm where Liana had just landed a junior marketing role. It had taken me 2 months of networking and calling in favors to get her that interview. I never even told her how many strings I pulled. "Hey," Mike said cautiously. "Listen, I didn't want to get involved, but she's been causing waves already. 2 weeks in, and she's missed 3 deadlines and talked back to a senior director. I thought you should know." I sat down at my desk, rubbed the bridge of my nose. "You don't owe her anything," I said. "Neither do I." Mike hesitated. "You want me to let her go?" There was a long pause. "No," I said finally. "Not yet. Just don't protect her when the consequences come." He understood. And that's the thing. Everyone who truly knew me knew I wasn't vindictive. But they also knew. I kept receipts. And when the time came, I cashed them in like debt. Later that afternoon, I went to the New York house, the brownstone she thought she could waltz into like some princess returning to her castle. I changed the locks. I removed her name from the smart home access. I had her stuff, what little she'd left there, boxed up and placed in the basement. Not tossed out. Not destroyed. I wasn't being cruel. I was just being done. I also called my lawyer, had her name quietly removed from my will. She was never formally adopted, so it wasn't even a fight. I had listed her out of sentiment years ago. That sentiment had expired. I also reviewed my financial accounts. She was listed as a beneficiary on a few of them. All gone now. Julia was still listed, but even that felt temporary in my mind. Because once you show me what I mean to you, I believe you. And when someone tells you that you're not real family, you'd be a fool to leave them in your will. The next bombshell came a week later. Liana showed up again, this time with Evan, the boyfriend. He was a tall, lanky guy with paint on his jeans and that vague look of being charming when it benefited him. He stood behind her while she knocked on my front door like it was owed to her. "You can't be serious," she shouted as soon as I opened it. "You told Evan I'm unstable?" I leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "No," I said. "I told Evan to ask you who actually paid your way through college. I told him to ask you what kind of person cuts someone out of their graduation after they covered their rent for 2 years." Evan shifted awkwardly. "Look, I didn't know there was so much history." "That's the thing," I said. "You never do. You only know the version of her that benefits you." Liana stepped forward, voice shrill. "You're trying to ruin my life." I raised an eyebrow. "No, Liana. I'm just no longer protecting the version of your life that was built on my silence." Julia arrived 10 minutes later, flustered, trying to play mediator. She asked to speak with me privately, and I agreed. We sat in the dining room while Liana and Evan sulked outside. She spoke in that voice people use when they've already lost and are just trying to save face. "Can we not escalate this? She's still young." I looked her in the eye. "She's 24. Old enough to choose who matters. Old enough to know how words cut. She chose to treat me like an outsider. Now she gets what that means." Julia reached for my hand. "Please, this isn't you." I pulled away. "It's always been me. You just never saw it because I was too busy trying to be something for your daughter. Now I'm just being me for me." That night, I poured myself a scotch and sat on the balcony. The city was loud in that comforting way it always is. Honest, relentless, unapologetic. I watched the skyline shimmer and thought about everything I had given and how little of it was ever acknowledged. And I made a promise to myself: no more apologies. No more fixing. No more being the doormat in a house I paid for. They could call me the villain. They could cry, scream, twist the narrative. I didn't care anymore. I was done being their emotional wallet. The keys weren't the only thing she lost that day. She lost her safety net. They always say people show you who they really are in moments of pressure. I used to believe that meant when things got hard, like illness, job loss, death in the family. But that's not quite it. No, what really brings out the truth is when the person who's always been holding up the roof finally puts their arms down and says, "Figure it out yourselves." I'd been that guy for 12 years, lifting beams, patching leaks, paying for additions no one asked for, but everyone expected. But now, I had stepped away. And suddenly, the cracks weren't just visible. They were flooding the whole damn house. Liana couldn't hold a job, couldn't keep a relationship stable without a story to bend in her favor. Julia couldn't go a full conversation without circling back to how I changed or turned cold. But the truth was, I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped pretending. It started with a phone call. I was in my office overlooking the Hudson when Mike called again. "Look," he said, "I gave her a lot of leeway because of you, but she's toxic." She rolled her eyes at a senior partner in a meeting yesterday and said he doesn't understand digital strategy because he's over 40. I didn't laugh. I didn't even sigh. "You know what you need to do?" I told him. He hesitated. "You're sure?" "Mike," I said calmly, "if I were anyone else, you would have fired her already. Don't keep her on for my sake. She made her choices. She can live with them." An hour later, he texted, "It's done. No anger. No guilt. Just the sound of another crutch being kicked out from under someone who thought they were standing on solid ground." And I felt nothing. Not relief, not regret. Just a quiet sense of inevitability. She had been tumbling for a while. I had just stopped cushioning the fall. That same evening, Julia came home from work with that look on her face. The one that meant a storm was brewing behind her eyes. I was pouring myself a glass of red wine when she dropped her purse on the counter. She got fired. No greeting. No preamble. Just blame wrapped in a statement. "I know," I said. "Mike called me." She squinted at me like I was some stranger. "You knew? And you didn't stop it." I took a sip, savoring the dryness. She was rude, disrespectful, and unprofessional. She wasn't fired because of me. She was fired because of her. Julia's voice cracked like a whip. You poisoned him against her. I set the glass down slowly. He's a 48-year-old executive, Julia. He doesn't need me to tell him when someone's a liability. She looked like she wanted to slap me. You're destroying her future because your ego is bruised. I raised an eyebrow. No, I'm just refusing to protect someone who's made it clear I don't belong. She walked out of the kitchen after that, muttering under her breath. I didn't follow. I used to trail after her, beg for understanding, try to be the bridge between her and her daughter. Not anymore. I'd burn the bridge, then watch them try to cross the ashes like nothing had changed. And when I say I didn't care anymore, I don't mean that with bitterness. I mean it with peace. I had mourned that family already. This wasn't grief. This was rebirth. That night, I drafted emails to my financial advisor. I moved accounts. I shifted property titles. Everything that had been in both our names was now reassigned. Julia would still get what she was legally entitled to, but Liana? Nothing. Not a penny. I wasn't cutting her off out of spite. I was simply closing a chapter. She made it clear that I was never real family. Well, real family doesn't get access to my empire. Real family doesn't pretend I'm invisible while expecting me to be a safety net. Then came the voicemail. I didn't even know I had missed a call until I checked my phone the next morning. It was from Liana, left sometime around midnight. Her voice slurred and angry. You think you can just ruin my life and act like it's justified? You're a bitter, lonely man. You always have been. You think just because you paid for things, that made you important? It didn't. It made you pathetic. You bought your way in, and now you're mad no one wanted you there. You're not family. You were a placeholder, and now you're nothing. I replayed that message 3 times. Not because it hurt. No, I'd already known she felt that way. But because there was something so freeing about hearing it out loud. She had always been polite to my face when she needed something. But that voicemail, that was her truth. And it gave me permission to stop pretending she'd ever loved me like a father or even respected me like a man. That weekend, I ran into someone unexpected. It was Claire, my niece from my late sister's side, someone I hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. We bumped into each other at a bookstore in Brooklyn. She hugged me tight and stepped back to get a better look. You look lighter, she said. I laughed. Divorce will do that. She tilted her head. Wait, are you guys separated? Not legally, I said, but emotionally. I'm on my own now. We ended up getting coffee. And over lattes, I told her everything. She was the first person I'd opened up to in months. When I finished, she leaned back and said, honestly, I'm glad. They used you. You deserved better. That validation hit deeper than I expected, because part of me still wondered if I'd gone too far, if stripping everything away had made me cold. But hearing someone else see me clearly, it gave me peace. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't cruel. I was just finished. The day after, Liana showed up again. This time, she was alone. No Evan, no Julia. Her face was puffy, eyes red. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. What do you want? I asked. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret. But then her mouth twisted. You're ruining my life, she said, voice low and shaking. I can't find another job. Evan and I are fighting all the time because of what you said. I nodded slowly. That sounds hard. She scoffed. Do you enjoy this? Watching me suffer? I shook my head. No, Liana. I don't enjoy it. But I'm also not losing sleep over it. Actions have consequences. Her voice cracked. I just needed some help. That's all. You had help, I said. For 12 years. But instead of gratitude, you gave me disrespect. Instead of love, you gave me silence. And now, you want access without relationship? I'm not an ATM. I'm not your fallback. I'm not your father. She didn't respond. Just stared at me with those burning eyes, tears threatening to spill, but pride keeping them back. She turned and walked away, shoulders hunched like the weight of the world was finally real to her. I watched her go, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free, not because I had hurt her, but because I had stopped betraying myself to make her comfortable. I had finally chosen me. I didn't plan to go to the party. It was a friend's birthday, someone I'd known from way back, a guy named Harold who'd lived in the same apartment complex as me in my 20s when we were both working temp jobs and scraping by. We'd stayed in touch through the years, mostly through occasional poker nights and mutual cookouts. He wasn't part of the family drama. He didn't know the details. And maybe that was what drew me there in the first place. A space where I could breathe, where no one looked at me like a monster or a traitor or a walking ATM that had finally shut down. So I went. I brought a bottle of wine, wore a clean-pressed shirt, smiled when people asked how business was going. I played my role, the one I used to play before I got entangled in someone else's idea of family. I was standing by the backyard grill with Harold when I heard her voice. I knew it before I even turned around. That sharp, slightly nasal tone that always got more dramatic when she was trying to make a point. Liana. And of course, Julia was with her. They entered like they owned the place, all fake smiles and sharp heels, hugging people they barely remembered from years ago. I could see Harold notice the shift in my posture, how my smile tightened, how I subtly turned my body away. "Everything good?" he asked. Yeah, I lied. Just wasn't expecting family. But they saw me. Liana's eyes locked on mine like a target. And before I could even step away, she was making a beeline for me, dragging her rage behind her like a designer purse. "You happy now?" she hissed as soon as she was within earshot, her voice just loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "You ruined everything. My job, my relationship, my reputation. You think that makes you powerful?" I didn't react, didn't flinch, just took a slow sip of my drink and said, "You ruined those things." I just stopped covering the damage. But she wasn't there for conversation. She was there for spectacle. She turned toward the small crowd that had started to circle, uninvited but undeniably drawn to the drama. "He's not who he pretends to be," she said to no one in particular. "This man is vindictive. He's cold. He cut me off without warning, just dropped me like I was trash. After years of calling me his daughter." The words stung, not because they were true, but because of how casually she weaponized history. She had never called me dad. Not once. Even when I paid for her braces. Even when I took her to her prom fitting when her mom had a work emergency. Even then, I was just Rick. Just a background character. But now, in front of strangers, she wanted to rewrite the script. Paint me as the villain. Julia chimed in, trying to play mediator, but only making things worse. "Rick, please," she said with a strained smile. "Let's not do this here." I looked her square in the face and said calmly, "You brought it here." The crowd hushed, eyes flickering with interest like we were a reality show unfolding in real time. Liana looked like she was about to cry, but her pride turned it into fury. "You're a bitter old man," she spat. "You'll die alone, and no one will care." For a moment, I said nothing, just stood there, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. Then I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe, but I'll die knowing I didn't spend my life being used." The silence that followed was suffocating. Julia grabbed Liana's arm and pulled her away, muttering something under her breath. People started to scatter, conversations resuming in awkward whispers. Harold came up beside me, handed me a new drink. "That was something," he said. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, actually, I am." The fallout wasn't just public. It spread like wildfire through the family grapevine. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years started texting. Some to say they supported me, others to scold me for being heartless. I didn't respond to most, but I did call my brother Paul, who had always seen through the performance Julia and Liana put on. He listened quietly as I told him about the party, about the confrontation. "You did the right thing," he said when I finished. "They've been eating off your plate for years and acting like you should be grateful." I laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, they're starving now." He paused. "Better they learn to cook for themselves." But not everyone agreed. A few days later, I got a text from Evan, the boyfriend. "Hey, can we talk?" I agreed to meet him at a diner on 10th, mostly out of curiosity. When I arrived, he was already there, fidgeting with his coffee cup. He looked tired, guilty. He didn't waste time with small talk. "She told me you lied, that you manipulated me into doubting her." I raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" He hesitated. "I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know what's true anymore. One day she's saying you never cared. The next, she's crying about how you were the only father figure she ever had." I leaned back in the booth, folded my arms. She had 12 years to say that to my face. She didn't. He nodded slowly. "I guess I just wanted to hear your side." I looked at him for a long moment. "You don't need to pick sides, Evan. Just pay attention to patterns. That'll tell you everything. We didn't talk long. He left looking conflicted, like a man standing between two collapsing buildings. I didn't envy him, but I didn't pity him either. We all have to learn eventually. And sometimes the lesson is this. When you build your life on manipulation and entitlement, you shouldn't be surprised when the foundation caves in. I had been the foundation. Now I was gone, and they were feeling the tremors. That night, Julia sent a text. Just 4 words. Can we talk soon? I stared at the screen for a long time. Not out of emotion, but calculation. What did she want? Reconciliation? Closure? Damage control? Whatever it was, I wasn't in the mood. I replied simply, not right now. And then I turned my phone off, poured a drink, and sat on the balcony, letting the silence hold me like it never had before. I didn't hear from Liana for almost 3 weeks after the party. Not a text, not a call, not even a secondhand guilt trip passed along through Julia. And honestly, it was bliss. For the first time in over a decade, my days felt like mine. I worked, cooked for one, read in silence, and walked through my own house without feeling like I was intruding in someone else's emotional crisis. The walls were quieter. The furniture stayed where I put it. The air wasn't thick with unspoken tension and rolled eyes. It's wild how peace doesn't arrive like a parade. It just settles in slowly, replacing chaos one breath at a time. And I was breathing again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to prove my place in my own home. But peace never lasts when other people still think they have a stake in your energy. The first sign of Liana's unraveling didn't come through her directly. It came through Evan. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I almost didn't pick up. His name flashing across my phone screen felt like a test I didn't sign up for. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," he said, his voice low and tired. "You got a minute?" I stepped out onto the balcony, away from the buzz of emails and appointments. "Go ahead." There was a pause on his end, like he was trying to decide how much of the truth to spill. "We're not doing good," he said finally. "She's been different since everything went down. I don't know how to talk to her." I didn't say anything, just let him twist in the silence a little. He continued. "She keeps bringing you up. Like all the time. Either blaming you or saying she wishes you'd just forgive her so things can go back to normal. But there's no normal anymore." Not really. That line stuck with me. There's no normal anymore. Because that was the most honest thing anyone in that triangle had said since this whole thing started. Liana was addicted to the idea of stability, of a version of reality where I was still footing the emotional and financial bills, even after she'd burned every bridge between us. She wanted the resources without the relationship, the trust fund without the trust. But life doesn't work like that. Love doesn't work like that. And I wasn't going to pretend anymore. "You're realizing it now," I said to Evan. "The difference between love and leverage. She used me. And now she's trying to use your empathy." He didn't argue. He just sighed. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to see it." The next time I saw Julia, she looked like someone who hadn't slept. Her makeup was carefully applied, but the fatigue showed in the way her shoulders slumped, in the tiny creases around her mouth she used to hide with lip gloss and charm. She invited me to dinner, at the house I technically still co-owned, though that wouldn't be true much longer. I agreed, not because I wanted reconciliation, but because closure is a luxury some people need spelled out in person. I showed up at 6. The dining room looked the same as always, except for the tension in the air that made the flowers in the vase seem like props instead of decor. She cooked salmon, my favorite, and I almost laughed at the subtle manipulation. Food had always been her olive branch. When things went wrong, she fed me instead of apologizing, hoping taste would dull memory. It used to work. It didn't anymore. We sat across from each other like two people negotiating the end of a ceasefire, and for the first 5 minutes, we didn't talk about anything real. Just weather, mutual acquaintances, what book I was reading. But eventually, she folded her napkin and looked me dead in the eyes. "I miss us," she said quietly. "The version of us that didn't have all this weight." I set my fork down, wiped my mouth with the napkin she'd folded just right. "You mean the version where I stayed silent while your daughter treated me like a stranger?" She flinched. "That's not fair." "No," I replied, "it's not. But it's true." She looked like she wanted to cry, but her pride wouldn't let her. "I didn't know it would cut you so deep," she whispered. "She was my daughter. I was trying to be there for her. And who was being there for me? I asked. Who was protecting me when I was excluded from a graduation I helped pay for? Who stood up for me when she called me a placeholder to my face? You didn't just let her hurt me, Julia. You helped her. She shook her head. I never meant to. But you did, I said. And meaning well doesn't erase the damage. It just makes you feel better about delivering it. The silence after that was louder than anything either of us had said all night. I could see it in her face, that slow, creeping realization that the gap between us wasn't something a couple therapy session could fix. She wanted to rewind time. I had already thrown out the tape. So what now? She asked, barely above a whisper. I leaned back, took a sip of water. Now, we talk to the lawyer. We divide assets. You get what's fair. I'm not out for blood. But I'm also not staying in a marriage where I'm invisible. She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I never thought it would come to this. I stood up and said, gently but firmly, you never thought I'd walk away. That was the mistake. I left before dessert. The street was quiet, and the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves in that way that always feels like change is in the air. I didn't feel angry, just complete. Like a story I had stayed in too long was finally ending, and I wasn't going to apologize for turning the last page. On the ride home, I thought about all the times I had twisted myself to fit their expectations, all the times I had let myself be reduced to a bank account with a quiet smile. And I realized something important. I had been trying to earn love from people who didn't know how to give it. Not real love. Not the kind that shows up even when you're inconvenient or flawed. I had been performing. They had been spectators. And now, the show was over. The first morning I woke up alone in the New York house. It was silent in a way that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The sun filtered through the linen curtains just right, and I lay there for a full 15 minutes without moving, listening to nothing but the sound of the city humming faintly through the glass. For the first time in over a decade, there was no one expecting anything from me. No demands. No passive-aggressive sighs over breakfast. No questions disguised as orders. Just stillness. That kind of peace doesn't arrive with a trumpet. It walks in like an old friend you haven't seen in years, takes a seat, and says, "You ready to start living for yourself now?" And I was. I truly, finally was. I'd sold the other house. The one I shared with Julia. We finalized the split a month after that dinner. The one where she finally stopped pretending she didn't know what she'd done. The legal part was simple. We'd always kept separate accounts for the most part, and I let her keep what she brought in. I took the house in New York, a few investments, and a retirement fund that no longer needed to cover anyone but me. We didn't fight over anything. I think deep down, she knew dragging it out would only expose more truths she wasn't ready to sit with. When I left that final meeting with the attorney, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. Like I had stepped out of a role that had become skin-tight and suffocating. I wasn't angry anymore. That part had burned off. What was left was something sharper. Sharper, but still soft. It was freedom with edges. Liana tried one more time. She sent a letter, handwritten, of all things. It arrived one afternoon while I was out on a walk through the West Village, and I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the counter for 3 days. I'd glance at it sometimes while sipping my morning coffee or waiting for my soup to warm on the stove. But I didn't touch it. I think part of me was afraid. Afraid she'd finally figured out how to say what needed to be said. Afraid she'd apologize in a way that made me wonder if I'd given up too soon. But more than anything, I was afraid she'd almost apologize, do just enough to stir guilt without ever taking real accountability. That's what hurt the most about people like her. Not their cruelty, but their ability to weaponize just enough remorse to keep you chained. When I finally opened the letter, it was what I expected. Not quite an apology, more of a carefully written PR statement. I know things got heated. I didn't mean to exclude you. I was just overwhelmed. You've done a lot for me, and I never said thank you properly. I miss how things used to be. I hope you can find a way to let go of the anger. No mention of what she'd said. No ownership. Just enough sentiment to look good on paper. I folded it once, then again, and tossed it into the fireplace. Not with rage. Not with any grand symbolic gesture. Just because some things don't deserve to be archived. Letting go isn't always about forgiveness. It's about refusing to keep the evidence around for another argument. People ask if I regret any of it. If I regret stepping back, speaking out, drawing a line. But the truth is, regret doesn't live here anymore. Regret left with the woman who told me I wasn't real family. It packed its bags when I changed the locks. It signed the divorce papers and waved from the rearview mirror. No, what lives here now is clarity. What lives here is space. What lives here is the understanding that love, real love, doesn't ask you to disappear. It doesn't make you prove yourself every day while withholding affection like a prize. Love isn't a ledger. It isn't a weapon. And it sure as hell isn't conditional. I walk more now. I cook for myself. I read entire books in one sitting without being interrupted by someone asking if I paid the phone bill or reminding me that the garbage needed taking out. I take day trips. I sit in quiet cafes with no one expecting me home by a certain time. I laugh more, even if it's just at dumb jokes and crossword puzzles. And every once in a while, I think about the life I left behind. Not with longing, just with curiosity. Like a museum exhibit I once knew well, but now pass by with only faint recognition. Somewhere out there, Julia is probably trying to pick up the pieces. Liana is probably telling someone else how she was victimized by a stepfather who expected too much emotional return on his investment. Maybe she's painting me as bitter, cold, unforgiving. That's fine. Let her. I'm not interested in rewriting her version of me. I'm not here to correct her narrative. My peace doesn't require her understanding. It only requires my truth. And my truth is this. I gave what I had to people who didn't know how to receive it. I stood in the fire for people who wouldn't even hold an umbrella for me. I built safety for people who left me out in the cold. And when I stopped, when I finally said enough, they didn't fall apart because I ruined them. They fell apart because I stopped holding them together. That's not cruelty. That's reality. That's what happens when a person who's been treated like a backup plan finally stops showing up. The best thing I ever did for myself was stop begging to be seen by people who preferred me invisible. The best thing I ever did was walk away, not with vengeance, but with clarity. And the best part? I didn't lose anything. They did. They lost someone who would have stood by them through anything, if only they'd treated him like he mattered. If you've ever found yourself being treated like a second-class member in your own home, let this story be your reminder. Silence isn't peace, and being taken for granted isn't love. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk away from a one-sided relationship. And if this story spoke to something deep in you, something you've lived through, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Someone else out there needs to hear that choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. See you soon in the next story.